How are you? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record remotely with a past guest of the podcast to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic, what sort of art or literature is helping them cope, and whether they're able to make art in the midst of it all. Before we get to the episode, I'll fill you in on my day, which some people ask about. It is a rainy Saturday, March 28th. So Amy and I are a little bored, but I had a good morning. I woke up around 5 a.m. with some pretty heavy anxiety, which is not part of the good morning, but I did my morning coffee and iced my calf and my knee, which I have to do as part of my running thing, while I read a book on my iPad rather than compulsively reading everything on Twitter. Then I went downstairs to the library to write in my journal. I'm trying to do that in the morning now since I get a little too burned out some evenings to do it, and I like to keep a daily routine. So when I finished, I looked up at the window right above my desk, and I noticed the dawn was just gorgeous. So grabbed my phone, went outside to try to get a decent picture of it. The view from my yard is okay, but I knew it would be better around the corner. So I walked the quarter mile to do that, took some pictures, and by the time I walked back home, the sort of gorgeous orange and pink and everything was already dissipating. But I was there for it, and I got to see something beautiful, and I managed to share a virtual representation of that on Instagram with people. And later in the morning, I did this run that I've been wanting to try for a while, and I walloped the heck out of it. So before the rain set in and made everything a little more tedious, I managed to kind of obliterate my anxiety through exercise and an appreciation of beauty. So let's get to today's guest. The guest is Peter Kuper, the cartoonist behind World War III Illustrated, and he's a three-time guest of the regular podcast, most recently at the end of 2019, where he talked about his graphic adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Now, as caveats go, I should say I'm not giving long intros for any of these guests because I want to get right to the conversation. Caveats, some New York noise on his side, but otherwise, not a whole lot. Here's us. You got back from Oaxaca to New York City like 2 days ago.
Tuesday night.
Oh, okay. A few days now.
Yeah.
How did it go? What was your risk assessment as to whether it was better to stay in Mexico or come to New York? And how are you dealing now?
Well, let me roll it back to the beginning of the trip, which was February 1st. My wife, Betty, and I moved back down to Oaxaca for what was planned to be a 3-month stay. And we had this great place right in town, which we had never lived in town. We always were about 10 minutes or 15-minute drive outside of town. It was really great to be right in walking distance of the center of Oaxaca. And so that was all set. And when we came down here, of course, there was the noise of coronavirus in China, and it was developing right in there, but it was to watch it at a distance, I was keeping up with the news, of course, but to see how it developed and watch the dislocation of our responses to the American response, or I should say, just seeing it at a distance, talking to some people would be, I understood some more, I think, from the outside, but then also realized that we were not caught up to the mentality that was in New York City, because in Oaxaca, right up until about a week and a half ago, it was not on the line of discussion, and all restaurants were open. Everybody was, I walk out the door. When I walked out the door, there'd be people there. In fact, sometimes people standing at my door, and we were right near a church, and there was weddings going on right up until last Saturday. So the disconnect was really huge. And when we kind of started to be aware and made aware of what was going on, and then we felt kind of crazy being in an environment where people were not reacting almost at all.
Yeah. And so yeah. New York seemed like a more advisable.
Well, our first the way it kind of ran was it really, I could define the line of the change in kind of what was going on in New York and what seemed to be at a distance where things changed was when Trump did his Oval Office speech. And it was like the day before that was one thing and the day after that was another. So anyway, we were down there and we were feeling like we were in this kind of beautiful bubble, and it was so much so. It's like summer down there. It's 80 degrees every day, flowers out, birds everywhere, butterflies. I was raising monarch butterflies while I was down there. And we had decided that we were going to just hunker down there and be there for what we thought would be, okay, there'll be maybe an extra month beyond our intended time of return, which was May 1st. We thought, okay, well, maybe we'll have to stay till June. And I even made the next step of asking our landlord if we could stay another month and kind of set that up. And he said, oh, yeah, good timing, because the next person just canceled, because it was all happening kind of at that moment. But I do a Skype lesson, Spanish lesson, and my teacher was from the very street that we were on in staying in Oaxaca, but she had moved to Canada. And when we were having our class, she said, "Oh, did you hear?" And this was about 2 weeks ago, Monday. So did you hear that stores are getting sold out of food? And we had not seen any examples of that at all. And that just kind of like kicked things into gear. And we ran and we got stocked up as much as possible, figuring to stay there for a few months. And we were basically all ready for that. And then we just had one of those, even just every day was kind of a developing thing. And we went out to a restaurant and people were Purelling us when we walked in the door. And maybe actually a defining point was cartoonist Reuben Bowling, a.k.a. Ken Fisher, had a trip to Oaxaca with his family. And amazingly, they kept it. And he came down March 14th on a Saturday. He was the first person that I had encountered who, when I reached out to shake his hand, wouldn't shake my hand. And I had just turned from being in a crowd. He was staying in a hotel nearby. And there was Benito Juarez, the first president of Mexico's birthday on that weekend. And there were, thousands of people there. The streets were crowded. There was a wedding going on right in front of his hotel, the bride and groom dancing and crowds and everything like that. And I bumped into somebody that I hadn't seen for a while, and I shook his hand and we hugged. He introduced me to some people. I shook their hand, and then Ken comes out of his hotel and I turned to him. He won't shake my hand. And the Mexican friend reaches out to shake his hand, and Ken backs away. And I say, oh, he's from New York, and he, it's different there, and you'll understand soon. And that was kind of that turning point for me where I was like, oh, right. Yeah, this is what's going on in New York. And it's just absolutely not on the table in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. But making the decision to actually return to New York instead of trying to find somewhere else in the U.S. that would, suffice temporarily.
If
like
I was
Center for Cartoon Studies maybe would have put you up or something.
That would be a great idea. I had, I didn't go that direction as much as anything, because our daughter, who was in school at City College of New York, she didn't join us in Mexico because she was in college, and then she got kind of stuck here when they closed the school, and she moved in with a friend. And so with the idea being that, staying far away from our daughter, and also just, this is our familiar environment. I mean, I do believe, even with it being the eye of the storm, that New York City is a place that might ultimately recover faster because of necessity, in the same way that, Hurricane Sandy hit and New York came back pretty quickly, relatively speaking, depending on where you were, of course. Mm-hmm. But
sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, but I was going to say, we absolutely were set on this. And a week ago, or tomorrow, my wife Betty woke up and she just said, I've been thinking about this, and I think we probably would be wiser to go home. And it just, when we did the calculus, it was like, it seems all warm and nice here, but in a month it could change drastically, especially watching how it's changed day to day in the United States. and in Italy and in China, and seeing, having these other reference points to how quickly things change, and noting that, number one, the government in Mexico they're literally saying, keep on hugging. I think they're about to change this, but they were like, President Obrador was saying like, oh, we're Mexican, we have to keep hugging, and we can't stop doing that. And he's out there shaking hands and kissing babies, just literally a week ago. And so it was clear the government wasn't going to lead the charge. It was also fairly clear that there's a good chance that Trump would shut the border if Obrador didn't turn around and do that himself, and that we could easily get trapped there, and that the idea that this was going to be a month or, even a couple of months suddenly seemed like, we could get really stuck here. Their medical system already is frayed, and that's just with normal day-to-day healthcare. And water is not a guarantee there. So we had a point where our cistern, which was enabled by the local government, it's kind of up to them to make sure we get water, and it dried up for about a week. And we have to buy bottled water anyway for drinking. That's just for showering and doing dishes. We could boil that, but we just realized we could be in a place where we don't have access to water, we don't have access to health care, and then we can't just decide we want to come home when we want to.
So how's New York?
It's so strange because I expected it to be actually a greater kind of lockdown than it is. It's disconcerting because I came back, flying back. We already were wearing masks and had alcohol. We were rubbing down the seats and then rubbing down our insides with cocktails. But that the idea that I thought it would be like empty streets and very, little traffic, and then people being notably locked down, like say wearing masks and gloves and things like that. And it seems to be about a quarter of the people have gotten on that boat. And I'm definitely on the mask, glove, do everything possible to prevent, but as much as anything right now, because we flew through Mexico City airport and we're on an airplane, and I'm more likely to be a carrier than a receiver. And so that's part of this conversation. It's like, it's not just about, ooh, I don't want to get it. It's also about, I don't want to give it.
Right. I mean, my old man is 82 years old. Haven't seen him since early February at this point, because chances are, if I've got any strain of this, it's going to be his ass if I spread it. So.
Well, or it'll be yours. That's the kind of
he's been living in quarantine for years now. So yeah, there's no outside world exposure on his part. But yeah. But
also just the notion of everything is moving kind of at this rate where we're learning about the truths of this. Slowly but surely as it unfolds, it's like, oh yeah, people 20 to 54 are getting it and getting very sick and ending up in the hospital too. It's not just
this was the big thing. They kept saying it's only fatal for people over 60, and that's the primary group. And we're like, there's a lot of other things besides fatal to deal with, like, months in a hospital and permanent lung scarring didn't kill you, but you're under 60 and you still ended up fucked for the rest of your life. So there was a degree that people weren't quite putting two and two together.
Well, I'd say people still aren't. I mean, I had that unpleasant conversation with one of my neighbors where in the morning she was coming out of the elevator and stepped over to me to start talking. Very lovely, friendly woman. And I stepped back, like, social distancing, right? I'm new here. I just came from Mexico. And then I ran into her again at the end of the day, and I'm wearing a face mask and I got a glove. I have a dog, so I'm out in the world no matter what. And we came into the inner lobby together, and she said, oh, this is a media hype thing. It's just really like a bad flu. And I was like, well, I don't agree with you. And I realized right after that, and then she and another person with their dog got into our extremely narrow, tiny elevator. I mean, you're almost shoulder to shoulder. Three people are getting very close in there, and I took the stairs. But you feel like it all feels so strange to apply these new sci-fi rules minus the phi, where everything is, we have to behave in a certain way, and you don't want to seem like a crazy person, and you don't want to be unfriendly, and yet you have to like catch up to something that's moving at, I think Cuomo said it went from being a freight train to being a bullet train, and I think it's more like a bullet.
Well, this was my thing. I've talked about this on a previous one. Amy and I were on a business trip for me in Japan through February 23rd, which is a Sunday. We got back. I was down in D.C. the following Friday, the 28th, and everybody wants to shake hands. And I told every single one of them, I just got back from Japan, and people would jump back. And then I would say, but how do you know where everybody else has been? Why are you perfectly willing? Oh, Gil, this isn't that serious. We'll know it's serious when the politicians start canceling fundraisers. I was like, that's cool for you. I'm not going to take any chances. I'm getting back on the train, wiping everything down, and going back to New Jersey. See you later. And that was the last time down there.
Yeah, good call. Well, and early, and you said it was February 23rd?
I got back on the 23rd, and then this trip was on the 28th. And
you were ahead of the curve. I mean, we in Oaxaca had self-isolated starting on Thursday of last week. So like, I don't know, let's see, a week ago.
No, it was
Thursday.
Yeah, right after the 11th. The 11th was, you said that was the Trump's Oval Office thing.
No, but this was,
you did it following week? Okay.
Well, no, because again, I was saying, like, that's when things sped up. And as it happened, my wife Betty's mom died in January, and she had to go back to the United States to deal with closing down her house and things like that. So she left on Tuesday. Trump's speech was on Wednesday. And I had like a flash of like, you shouldn't go. You should not go back to the United States now. But it's sort of like they'd been doing she and her sister had been doing a lot of warm up for this. And she was like, oh no, I'm going to do it. And she even came to see our daughter, who was co-directing a play at City College. She got back. She actually got back on a Tuesday, and this was, I guess, 2 weeks ago. Time is compressed in the strangest of ways. She left on the 10th of March, and she actually got to the play in New York, and that she got into the play, and they announced that it was too many people. They had gone over the 50 people marker, which at that moment was what they were deciding, and Betty and a few other people were pushed out but the play went on, and then the next day. The play was canceled and school was shut down. So it was all very like right there at that little window of time. And then she was going to be there for like 2 weeks, and she ended up dealing with some paperwork and getting back and flying back down there. And in that interim time, she went from feeling like people were overreacting to going, oh yeah, this is really serious. And, but it was, the slow burn of recognition, which I'm still seeing in the streets here. I really still feel like people are so not taking this as seriously as they need to.
Yeah. You mentioned the sci-fi without the fi. Is this living up to your World War III illustrated visions of society collapse or anything?
It's working its way towards that. I was looking through my journal, and I've been writing more and more as this goes on, as you probably noted from the text I sent you at 3:30 in the morning. I walking down the street and seeing people with face masks here and there, and being one of those people wearing them, the way it becomes the new normal is really very curious. Having lived in Oaxaca, Mexico, during this time of this teacher strike that turned in where there was federal troops, there was a period I was in an environment where you got your bag checked by lineup of guys in riot gear, and that became the new normal down there, where it just felt like, oh, it's so this is kind of the Nazi Germany vibe that I have had visions of, and now it feels like there's a certain degree of normalcy, like when you're indoors, you can kind of have, I have periods of just forgetting, and I'm drawing. This is highly inspiring as it happens. And that And when I'm drawing, even when I'm drawing about it, I get kind of lost in the drawing and excited by what I'm doing. And so it's easy to kind of forget about it. I believe that what we're coming up on in the next month is where this starts to get much bigger. Like just literally, a half an hour ago, Trump announced that he's considering quarantining New York, New Jersey, and parts of Connecticut. I don't know if you caught that. But,
oh, yeah.
So, that little detail, that's starting to have that authoritarian, when he says it's going to be like I forget the terminology he used, but it would be like, not just mandated, but it was more like
enforceable.
Enforceable, yes. So it's a very, one of those 1984 words. And it just had the quality of like, okay, where this can go and how there's going to be people that are going to use this to a certain advantage, like just the fact that, say, they relaxed laws on pollution, the so-called EPA, just said a couple of days ago, we're going to let the industry self-police. That's, the Koch brother dream right there. And so I'm looking at this and I'm seeing things that are coming that are closer to the bigger dystopian view that I have been drawing about in World War III for a while, and that where you really get that full-on lockdown where there's military vehicles in the street and you're not allowed to be on the street. That hasn't hit yet, but in the same way that my wife and I looked at the scene in Oaxaca, and it's so picture perfect there now with this fabulous weather and just it's the pageantry of Mexico and the colors of the way people paint buildings. Just walking around is such a joy there. You're really taken out of there being any problems on a certain level, and that there's so I had this gigantic disconnect there, and I lost the train of thought. I was headed.
Oh, just the potential for a fascistic breakdown. Crackdown, basically.
I'm always with that thought.
I figure that's the background for everything.
Yeah, I know it. So what I was going to say was that so my wife and I basically looked at this beautiful scenario and then looked past it and said, this is all really beautiful, but if there's no water, what's it like? And if there's just complete chaos with governments and healthcare, what will it be like? And it's very hard to stare at that when you're in a beautiful environment or in a normal, basically normal life, to see that kind of thing, which is what science fiction writers do all the time. And that there's just a part of my brain that is always going towards that kind of scenario. And I try to fight it a little bit just because it's like, if you're in a, looking at a beautiful sunset, it's best not to just jump to thinking of a nuclear explosion. But my brain does like to do that. Just, it just has been playing with that. So when I'm walking down the street and, in New York, they have all these kiosks that have these TV screens on them, which is another one of those images of the future. Yeah, there's Orwellian feature. And I have had more than once the image of, I don't know, Donald Trump's face appearing on there. And he's telling you to, whatever it is he's going to tell you about getting indoors or you'll be shot, or just when you walk by a screen and it's broken and it's just doing that kind of like white noise, shaky something.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, there's the vision I have of this breakdown future. And so I am inspired in a certain way to, it causes me to process those things and try to say something about it and look at it and stare it in the face and not be strictly frightened by it, not just be frozen. So there's a kind of a weird fuel that I have gotten from that. I'm not happy about being.
You're not glad for the material, but
exactly. But I am glad for an outlet for my fear and seeing these things. And I'm really trying to in cartooning find the humor or it's albeit dark, but that to get attached to things that are that can maybe in some ways explain what's going on, but also laugh at it. Gallows humor is really required now. I'm sure I would have been joking about the barbed wire in 1943 in some way, and then been all sad.
But I never thought that would come from me. Yeah. But some people like myself are finding it difficult to focus. Work I'm okay with, but reading and everything else, I just have had trouble disconnecting enough from the feed to be able to just read a book, etc. But you're finding yourself able to kind of compartmentalize or be, we'll say, productive in the face of this.
When I got down to Mexico, and one of the real joys of going down there is it kind of like picks up the needle, and there's certain things that aren't happening, and I get a lot of reading done down there. As it happened, the first book I read was Andromeda Strain.
Oh shit!
Just by chance, I was at the library and I was like, oh, that looks good. I read Andromeda Strain, followed by Terminal Man, Michael Crichton, and then I read E.O. Wilson's The Naturalist.
That's funny because Jim Ottaviani is adapting that into a comic right now. He just mentioned it on the last podcast. That's his next assignment. So.
How fantastic! That was then putting kind of back on track. To go into a later end of the story here. While I was down in Mexico, I got word that I had gotten the Kuhlman Fellowship at the New York Public Library. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It's a 9-month time period to work on a project, and they give you an office. I'm now at a point where I wouldn't be surprised if they tell me, sorry, it's off. It depends on how extended this is. I'm going to just, enjoy imagining it for right now. But one of the things, the project that I was thinking of was highly unformed, but something about the intersection between humans and insects, where we overlap, where our symbiotic relationship. And so I was getting some insect books. There was a great book that came out right while I was down there on the Natural History Museum's collection of old books of insects and art on that. And I had read Silent Spring, and in fact, actually not this Sunday, but next Sunday, a little book review I did for the New York Times Book Review comic strip on the back page should be coming out on Silent Spring. I did a little roundup of it, and it's seeming extremely timely. And I did this, I think 4 or 5 months ago.
And I think it's ironic that you use the term Roundup, given that that's the name of the insecticide. Well, never mind. Or weed killer, actually.
Yes, Roundup. That's right. Yeah. But anyway, I'm heading in a light direction. I swear I am. So when I was maybe the first week that Betty and I were in Oaxaca, we went up into our old neighborhood, and there's an area that you can hike in that goes up into the mountains. And I knew there to be an area where there are milkweed plants, and that is the one thing that the monarch butterfly survives on. It requires. And we got up there, and I had a backpack, and I was like, oh man, you know what? A lot of them had been kind of plowed down. They'd done some construction up there. They clearly were not concerned about them. And I was like, I'm going to take some of these plants back to our place in town, plant them, and maybe you get spread the milkweed love around here. And so I got 2 or 3 plants, brought them home, planted them. They started to wilt, but they hadn't died yet. And I suddenly saw 2 tiny caterpillars on them. And I don't believe they were on there before. So I think a monarch flew into our backyard, laid eggs on them. They popped out. And pretty quickly, and my very really smart idea that my wife had, was to put them under a mosquito net with the plants and everything out of doors under a mosquito net, because there's this fly, the techinid fly, that attacks the caterpillar, and it lays eggs inside of the caterpillar, and it's totally aliens. It just basically the little tiny fly larvae slowly eat away non-essential organs of the caterpillar as it grows. The caterpillar will go into a chrysalis, and then just when it's about to come out as a butterfly, usually sometimes 7 little maggots will finish eating up the butterfly and then pop out the side, and then they turn into flies. And in raising them monarchs previously, most of them died this way. And it's really heartbreaking, because you get through the whole process, and then you're right there and you think the butterfly's about to come out, and then the chrysalis turns black, and it
horror movie.
Yeah, it's completely horror movie. So I had these two monarch caterpillars, and they're growing. They were eating through the plants that I had gotten from this way up. It would have taken me about 2 hours to get back there, get more plants, and come back down. And I was getting nervous because they're voracious and they're growing at this amazing rate. And so like every day I'm checking on them, and it was putting me in a lovely frame of mind that was not about coronavirus. And they just about the point they were getting done with leaves, I was out for a walk in our neighborhood, and I looked down and there was a milkweed plant just randomly growing out of a little, patch of dirt. And I became the milkweed thief, and I grabbed the plant, took it home, planted that, taped leaves to a stick so that they could get at it. And then they went through those leaves, and that plant basically lost all its leaves and nearly died. But it takes a while for it to kind of recuperate. I found yet another plant in town, but it was like right outside of a restaurant window, and that it was like in the window. There was a tree. There was like a giant tree growing, and coming out of that was another milkweed plant. I had to walk by in this completely surreptitious way and grab leaves and then keep walking. And I'm like, what? I feel like I'm robbing something serious. It's like, they don't care if they have a milkweed plant, but there are people in the restaurant. I was prepared to show a picture on my phone. Look, I'm really doing this for the
I'm the butterfly guy.
I'm the butterfly guy. So I managed to just get enough leaves, and I was just getting to that point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to run out of leaves now. And the caterpillars climbed up inside the mosquito net. They go into a little J curve, and then they release this liquid that becomes the chrysalis around them. And that was about 8 or 9 days before we left. And every day I'm looking at it and checking, okay, it'd be great if they come out. Any moment the thing could turn black and the fly will come out. And we left on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. At 8:55, one of them popped out. And I mean, the guy was there, our ride to the airport was there. They put the bags in there, and I walked over to the chrysalis, and had already completely, they go translucent. You could kind of see the shape of a crunched up monarch in there. But even at that point, it can turn and go and it turn.
Burst out in horror.
Yeah, exactly. Aliens comes out, sprays me. And I looked at it and I was just like, you really have to come out now if this is going to happen. And then I walked around, I did a few things, and I when I came back, it was out like the wilted wings and then puffed up. And the other one I knew was going to come out literally, 15 minutes after I left. That same morning, I'm not superstitious per se, but these were like these good omens. But the same morning, I was moving a tarp. And just as I was moving, I had to move some bricks that were around it. I lifted up a brick and I was like, oh, whoa, I should just be careful because there's scorpions around. And we encountered them several times in the last few months. And I lifted up. So when I lifted a brick, I looked at it and make sure that there wasn't anything on it that I was going to grab hold of. And then I moved the tarp, and as I moved it, a huge scorpion went skitter, skitter, skitter by my foot. And I was like, okay, that's one. Didn't get stung. That's a plus. And then literally 15 minutes later, the monarch came out, and I thought, okay, we should be able to get back to New York unscathed. I think this is a very dangerous time, muy peligroso, but it's going to be. We're going to get home. So that was a little nature whisper in my ear.
I'm glad you got a good omen. I'm glad you're back safe. Hope you stay safe in all this. And, we'll get you on again, and we'll actually be in person. I pray to God next time we get together.
Fingers crossed, and good health to everybody.
Thanks so much, Peter. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
That was Peter Kuper. So go check out peterkuper.com so you can see all the amazing work he does, like his graphic adaptations of novels, his spy versus spy strips, the amazing graphic novel Ruins, his New Yorker gags, and more. And that's peterkuper.com. He's also on Twitter at pcooperart and Instagram at cooperart, all one word. We'll be back irregularly with more of these COVID check-ins. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18@gmail.com. You can find my contact info at our sites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. And in case you're interested in the setup, I'm using Zencastr to record these remotes. It's spelled like it sounds, except there is no final E. So Zencastr ends, well, it's Zencastr. It's a pay service, but my Patreon supporters more than cover it, especially since I'm no longer spending money on parking and tolls and coffee to record those in-person episodes. If you can spare anything, find the Patreons or other crowdfunding models for the other artists and writers and podcasters and everybody else you like, and show them some support. People in the arts are getting hammered right now because of lack of assignments, publishers cutting things down, everything else that the rest of us are going through. But if you can spare something, spare it for the artists and writers in need. I am Gil Roth, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. Thanks for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.